co-parents can be very negative toward one another. And I think each of us has only a certain amount of emotion to go around. We're not limitless. And so the question is, where am I going to put my emotion? Now, if I am putting a lot of negative emotion out toward my ex-husband or ex-wife, I'm depleting my emotional energy. Why would I do that if I want to invest in those people who are life-giving and who I enjoy, especially my children?
From the Family Life Podcast Network, this is Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. This donor-supported podcast helps blended families and those who love them pursue the relationships that matter most. And if you're in the United States, what really matters this week is Thanksgiving. For all my fellow Americans, may your turkey be plentiful. And to everyone else listening, no matter where you are, may just the mention of this holiday deepen your gratitude for all that the Lord has done for you. You know, I'm really glad you've joined Family Life Blended in your family journey. Welcome to episode 69, Good Co-Parenting, Conflict and Cooperation with Your Ex. Have you ever thought about what it would be like to listen in on two physicians discussing your medical condition? Well, if you're a co-parent, today you get to listen in on two therapists talking about your children and how you co-parent. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you, or maybe inform you for the first time, that Family Life Blended has the world's largest collection of articles, videos, resources, and books for blended families. We've got books like The Smart Step Family Guide to Financial Planning, The Smart Step Family Marriage, and Building Love Together in Blended Families. These books are just some of the many resources we provide to families and ministry leaders. And now we have a new online course that I'm really excited to tell you about. And we've got more courses in the works. The course we're releasing now is for ministry leaders. It's a certificate course in blended family ministry. You're going to learn how to create and sustain a thriving step-family ministry right there in your home church and community. You're going to learn how to address some of the tough questions about divorce and remarriage, and how at the very same time to respond with mercy and grace and truth. And you're also going to learn how to lead what I call dynamic small groups that transform lives. It's all available. The show notes will tell you how to get a hold of that course. Okay, so let's talk about co-parenting. Dr. Mary Jeppsen is a friend of mine. She's a therapist who specializes in working with court-ordered co-parents. And she recently wrote a professional manual for clinicians who want to know more about this type of work. She and her husband, Michael, have 11 children. Yes, you heard me right. They have 11 children. And recently, they retired to Dauphin Island, Alabama. Okay, you're going to learn a lot from this lady. Here's my conversation with Dr. Mary Jeppsen. Mary, I appreciate you joining me today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's always good to get together with you.
You know that I've been a fan of your work for some time. As a clinician, a few years ago, you released a book written to therapists about working with parents in co-parenting situations, some of them high conflict situations. And I endorsed your book because I really liked it. I thought the principles were great for counselors, people working in the court system, working with parents in difficult co-parent situations. But what we're doing today is we're talking to parents, and we're just going to try to extend to them some of the things that you have learned from working with both relatively low conflict couples, just trying to improve their co-parenting situation, and really difficult high conflict, court-ordered, the judge said, go see Mary type of situations. And so we're going to be trying to pass on some of that wisdom to people listening today. But I got to just ask you as we start, how did you get into doing court-ordered therapy with high conflict co-parents?
Well, Ron, I started out as a play therapist. I was working with children young children up to, teenagers. And many of the children that I saw had parents who had recently divorced or had been divorced for a while. And I realized that the children often became the identified patients in these situations, and that the parents were the ones that were having a very difficult time. Not that they, quote unquote, needed counseling, but rather that there was nothing to really help these parents navigate parenting. I mean, parenting is hard.
Hmm.
You're a parent. And when you're married,
Yes,
parenting's
yes.
hard. But if you're not married, imagine how difficult that would be and without any help. And so I got into it because I was trying to respond to the need I saw in the parents that were the parents of my children that I was seeing. And
Hmm.
so I went to the family court judges, and that's history. I mean, they've been referring to me ever
Started
since.
working with them specifically.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's really great.
Yes.
You and I both know one of the best ways to do child therapy, if you will, is to work with their parents, right? Because at the end of the day, we as parents set a huge climate for our children that to grow up. And that is true even of fractured, divorced, whatever the backstory is, co-parents who are trying to raise children between homes, isn't it?
Exactly. And the kids need a felt sense of safety, and the parents don't know how to give it because they don't feel safe themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking to all parents today. Again, whether you have a good working co-parent relationship, there's going to be some principles in here that are really going to be useful. And I think maybe you'll see yourself in some of the games that co-parents play, manipulative games sometimes. But I also want to, right off the bat, speak to high conflict co-parents that are listening right now. Maybe there's a threat of going to court. Maybe you've threatened that, or the other household has threatened that. I'm just curious, do you have some things you want people to know about going to court? What are the downsides of taking your circumstances into a courtroom?
Well, first of all, I would say that yes, litigation is sometimes necessary. So we can't
Okay.
say it's terrible to go to court. But second of all, I would say that when you enlist a lawyer to represent you in court, the lawyer is representing you. The lawyer is not representing the interests of your children or the interests of your ex or soon to be ex. And so there are certain things that kind of happen. I describe it to my clients. It's like you get on a freight train and sometimes you can't stop it. So, one thing I would say
Mm.
to most co parents who have to go to court or need to go to court or want to go to court is that they are in charge of what happens. And they are hiring a
Mm.
lawyer to represent them. But the lawyer doesn't just represent them to win, they should also represent their character. And so they can set limits, they can set boundaries, they can set the feel of what's going to be happening in court.
But Mary, I can hear somebody listening right now pushing back and saying, but wait a minute, my attorney says I should push for more time with the kid. I should push for more money, that she is not paying enough child support, and I have every right to go in there and push for that. Are you suggesting that they should say to their lawyer, shut up, that's not what we're doing, that's not in the best interest of my children? You're just wanting to fight for me, but you're not necessarily fighting for my kids? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I think that
Okay.
yes, people should fight for time with their children because their children need them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, people who are not getting enough child support need to have enough child support to support those children. I mean, all of that
Mm-hmm.
helps in their parenting, but I think you can do it in an abrasive fashion or you can do it in a civil fashion. And
Mm.
as abrasive as a lawyer might want you to be, I think you can say, no, I'm not going to be abrasive. We will fight for this, but we're not going to fight in a nasty way. We're not going to make this traumatic.
So you can set the tone and you can make sure that your attorney is listening to that and following the tone and the character that you want to portray.
Yes, that's what I would say. Because, I mean, for goodness sake, if you've ever gone to a lawyer for a custody case, it's going to cost you a college education. So you really ought to be the one to say, this
Yeah.
is what I want to portray.
Okay, that's good. I really do think that's an eye-opener for a lot of people. I've worked with so many people through the years that it's almost like just because their attorney said you should do this or you should fight for that, the people felt like they had to do it because the attorney knows more than I do. And that's what I want, is an aggressive attorney that will win this case. So I think it's really eye-opening that you can be the one to set the tone for how this thing goes into court. And what's the downside if you don't and it becomes clearly antagonistic?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do what your lawyer says. I mean, obviously, you've hired him. He knows what to do. But I think you can set the spirit of what happens and
Okay.
be careful about your attitude. The downside of a nasty litigation is that things are said and done that can't be unsaid or undone. And often the children become collateral damage in those heavy-duty court cases, and they are the ones that suffer because they're being pulled in two directions by two parents. I would add that if it's anticipated that it's going to be a rough legal battle, I would say to every single couple that's going to have a rough legal battle, please hire an ad litem attorney for your children so that the children's interests are being expressed and so that the children are protected.
For somebody who doesn't know, that's an attorney who's specifically there to represent the needs of the children.
And the children only. Yes.
Okay. Good word. Okay, let's turn the corner. Let's just talk about co-parenting and some of the challenges within a good co-parenting environment. But let's start here. The research is really clear. There's a direct correlation between a child's emotional and psychological adjustment to their parents' divorce and how civil their parents are to one another well after the divorce is over. What's that correlation about? How is it that a child's emotional and psychological development is connected to their parents' conflict?
Well, I think that, you know this, parents are the most important people in a child's life, right? I mean, your mom, your dad. I mean, I don't know about you, but I tried to please my father till I was 54, for goodness sake. So here I am, a younger child in a divorce situation. I'm pulled between two parents. My world has been rocked. My safety is based on my home, and my home is based on mom and dad being together. So that home breaks up, and my sense of safety is totally rocked. I've got to find another sense of safety. And in situations where moms and dads continue to fight, at least openly in front of the children, I'm not sure that the children ever feel or get a sense of safety in either home. So they're going to look somewhere else for a sense of safety, and that's not what we want. So I think parents have to be really, really mindful of the fact that it's their responsibility to provide their children a sense of security, a sense of safety, even after divorce. And that is basically based on the children seeing positive civil interactions between mom and dad, and the kids knowing, I'm going to get to see mom, I'm going to get to see dad. This is where we're going to be. This is what it's going to look like. And I think often parents are so hurt and so, I guess, in turmoil themselves that they have a hard time expressing this to the children.
I heard you make an observation once that was really helpful for me, and that is, okay, so this civility between mom and dad and connection to a child's overall well-being doesn't really matter how much time has passed since the divorce. It doesn't really matter how old the child is when the divorce takes place or how old they are now. I think that's a little surprising sometimes to people because we kind of have this, well, it's been a few years. So, that was 10 years ago, 15 years, that was 20 years ago. Oh, the kids are 25. They're fine. This is not a big deal for them, for us to go through divorce. That's not really true, is it?
Not really. I mean, I think time does help to a certain extent. But if you grow up with parents who are in conflict, you're facing that all the time. And most studies will tell you that you really don't know how a child is affected by divorce until they become old enough to have their own relationships. And if you've ever known somebody who grew up with parents in conflict, they'll tell you it was horrible. It was horrible when we had our first child. It was horrible when we got married. It was horrible when my grandfather died. I mean, all those situations where there's potential for some kind of harmony, there is also potential for some disharmony, and that's destructive, even for adult children. So I think kids are really affected by how their parents relate to each other. Even kids from, I mean, I have adult children. They're affected if they see my husband and I fight.
Yes. And I think that's really important. I want to be clear about that. It's about conflict between the parents, whether you're married or divorced. I mean, children who grow up in an intact home where mom and dad are still married to one another but miserable, they are dramatically impacted by that level of conflict as well. And so, feel free to correct me if I'm not right about this. It's as much about the conflict as it is as to whether or not you're still married or in a divorce situation. In other words, do you think this is generally true that divorced co-parents who do a really good job managing their hurt and their anger between one another and they co-parent relatively well, that creates a fairly safe and stable environment for their children? They're still moving between homes, there's still complications, but if the conflict is low, children benefit from that. Yes?
Yes, I think that's true. I think a lower conflict situation or a no conflict situation is ideal, because I think children feel like they have to take sides all the time, even adult children. And that's stress producing, that's anxiety producing, and that's really not their job. It's our job as parents to manage our own conflict.
Okay, so to the listener, I just want to be really clear about this. Here's your hope. Your hope is in striving towards cooperative co-parenting. Sometimes I hear people say, well, we're divorced. We can't do anything about that. Therefore, my kids are sunk. No, that's not true. There's a lot you can do, even under these circumstances, to improve their overall well-being, and it has to do with how you manage the co-parenting relationship between the homes. That's what we're after. That's why we're talking about this today. What, in general, makes that difficult for co-parents to cooperate? What are some of the emotions? What are some of the things that get in the way of good co-parenting? Hurt is the first one that comes to mind for me.
Hurt is huge. Hurt, betrayal, mistrust, all of the things, that come between moms and dads. And unless those things are somehow addressed, then I always tell my clients, I say, it's kind of like you're dragging a ball and chain into that relationship. It'll come up and poison your co-parenting relationship. I do suggest to my clients that they allow themselves to grieve over their losses. I mean, I always tell them, it may have been a great idea for you to divorce. Sometimes it's necessary. I get that. But that doesn't mean there is no loss. When people divorce, a marriage dies and there is loss. And you lose friends, you lose situations, you lose money, you lose a pet sometimes. And the worst thing that you lose is time with your children, because never again will you see your children every day. And I think it's important that parents grieve over that and face it and come to a kind of like a reconcile themselves to the fact that, yes, they are divorced and yes, these are the changes. And then added to that is that when two people are married, you know how much hurt there is. I mean, marriage is powerful, right? It's really powerful.
Yes.
And so the love is powerful and the hurt is powerful. So you take a divorce situation, and there are so many offenses that people carry against their ex-spouse. And so I try to suggest that they almost even go down the list of the time you came home drunk, the time you betrayed me, the time you said this to me, the time you didn't listen, or the time you were online shopping and you made us totally poor. All these things.
Mm.
If you can go down that list and then look at it, face it, and say, okay, I'm releasing this. I'm not going to let this get in the way of my relationship with my children. And sometimes I think facing those things and letting them go is kind of essential, because otherwise those things, the minute you look at that person or hear their voice, it's probably a trauma response. It's in there and it just comes out again and again and again and again. And that's not helpful for the children, particularly. They need you all to give each other a clean slate.
This is an important connection you're making. My forgiveness work towards my former spouse has everything to do with my ability to be a good co-parent. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, children are going to be impacted. If I can't forgive, won't forgive, whatever that is, that gets in the way of creating a good parenting climate.
Exactly. And some parents will tell you, but I can't forget. You're asking me to just forget? And I always say forgiveness isn't necessarily forgetting. It's facing the offense, and for your own sake and the sake of your children, letting go of that offense and starting a new pathway with the person.
For the sake of your children and yourself. It is good for you. It is.
Exactly.
Sometimes people get stuck there like, well, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to let him or her off the hook. They don't deserve to be let off the hook. Okay, well, that's a conversation for us to have. But in the meantime, do it for your kids.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a direct correlation there that I think is really important for our listener to get. It feels like forgiveness is about the old marriage and has nothing to do with the current day parenting. No, that has everything to do with the current day parenting because it's the hurt and the bitterness, as you said, the animosity, the stuff between you that gets in the way of you then being able to be in control of yourself when you're around them or when they say something that's, again, infuriating, for you to be able to put on a little patience and, long suffering, and in this parenting moment when the kids are watching, you not lose it again. Your reactivity goes down. That's where it immediately connects into the present. That's really good.
Also, the question is, do you want to be free? I mean, if you've divorced somebody, do you really want to be free? Well, if you really want to be free, then allow yourself to be free and go forward. It's really, in some ways, even better for you to say, I'm not going to let that affect me. I'm not going to let that control my emotions. Why would you let somebody who you don't want to live with control your emotions? That's like a waste of energy.
Yeah. One of the ways you put it is you got to let your marriage die, which means you got to grieve it. You got to come to the finality of it. And then you have to really let it go. Sometimes in the past, I've called this acting divorced. Sometimes you're legally divorced long before you act like you're divorced. You're still holding on to that marriage relationship. And let me just say that there's at least two kinds of listeners right now, Mary. One of them is, I wanted the divorce. And so Mary's right. I really wanted to be free. I need to act like I'm free. I need to forgive like I'm free. I need to be able to let that go so I can turn a corner and move into the present. But there are some people listening who did not want the divorce. They fought against it. They fought to save the marriage. It was their partner who ended this thing. They never wanted this. And so you're asking me to act divorced, to let the marriage die. That's really difficult. What would you say to that person?
Well, I would say, yes, it's particularly difficult if it is not in your theology, or if you really believe that divorce is unacceptable. That's really, really hard for people. But I guess I would say to people like that your children need to move on. Your children don't need to look at the part of the dyad that wanted to leave and say it's their fault. That's not helpful for your kids. I mean, I would say if you can't do it for yourself, do it for the children, and recognize that if you feel like you did not have a choice, maybe you didn't have a choice, but you have a choice now. And the choice is to move on and make the best of the situation, or to stay in the past even though the other person has moved on. Which is more healthy? I would say moving on is more healthy emotionally for you.
Okay, I really want to get into some of your key principles for good co-parenting relationships. Before we do that, just a couple of kind of high-level questions. Here's an observation I made. The holidays, birthdays, special days. This podcast is coming out close to Thanksgiving, one of the American holidays for our international listeners. Why do the holidays make it more difficult sometimes to put on a good face and act right as a co-parent?
Well, I think holidays are hard for everybody, whether you're a co-parent or not. It's a triggering family time. And I think it's very difficult. I think some parents also kind of have traditionally maybe depended on their children to be a cushion in that family situation. And so they're plunged into a situation where it's not their holiday and they don't have a cushion. And they have to develop maybe a different way of relating to their family. I think also you miss your children, like Christmas morning. When I meet with co-parents, I always say, so what do you guys want to do? Do you want to share just the Christmas day? I mean, I always make that suggestion because, especially if the children are little, because I realize how much it's going to hurt that morning, because you've had your life with them and that's a joyful moment. But I think there are things that you can build into your co-parenting to kind of lessen the blow and make it easier on you and make it easier on the kids.
That's good. Okay, high level, one of Jesus' principles for doing life in Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. What does that mean? What if your enemy happens to be your former spouse? How do you love them? How do you pray for them? Is that a good high-level attitude that people should strive for?
Oh, well, if Jesus said it, obviously it's a good high-level attitude to strive for. I think that it's not easy. I think we have to look at the word love, and we have to say, okay, it's no longer romantic love. This is agape love. This is unconditional love. This is love that comes from the heart of God. So I may not have it in my heart, but if I know God, he has it in his heart, and he can share that with me. I think we have to recognize the difference between our human love and the kind of unconditional love that's required of us, really, with everyone.
Okay, and so as we start going through some of these principles of good co-parenting, what's the role of step-parents, by the way? Because I know we got some step-parents listening. We certainly have some people that are still single, but we have blended family couples, and they're wondering, what role should step-parent play in all this?
Well, I think, first of all, step-parents can be the most essential cog in the wheel in these situations, and they can make it or break it. I often see clients who come to me and they're not married. Obviously, they got divorced. They've been divorced 3-4 years, and we're working through their relationship. And then on the scene comes a step-parent. What I notice sometimes is a step-parent naturally will side with their spouse and become very almost militant about the spouse maybe changing their visitation, wanting the child more, this and that. That is not necessarily the most helpful thing, because that sets the step-parent at odds with the co-parent who has been rocking along doing things okay. So I think as a step-parent, you have the power to either encourage a really good co-parenting relationship, and often step-parents are the ones that make it happen. If there's too much hurt, sometimes a step-parent can be that soft voice. They can be that sweetness that comes through. They can be that cushion, between the two parents. Or the step parent can be a almost an agitator. And we don't want that. We don't want the step parent to be an agitator. We want the step parent to be that encourager, that person who says, listen, honey, I know it was horrible. I get it. But we're married. I love you. You're not married to them anymore. We can make this happen and do what you can. And I've seen, I know there's one situation where parents couldn't even be in the room together. And both of the step parents were amazing. So we would have co-parenting therapy with the four of them. And the step parents actually took the role of taking care of business together because they recognized that their spouses couldn't do it. And it was beautiful, actually, what happened there. So I think step parents can be
That's good.
Really, really a great blessing, and a great blessing to the children, just to be there for them and to encourage their relationships with both parents.
In my experience, I often find an objectivity in step parents that the bio parents don't have. The bio parents have that hurt mitigating their objectivity, and that makes them more reactive. But step parents, as an outsider coming into the process, can say, well, wait a minute, we could make that sacrifice on behalf of the kids. Yeah, that's not exactly the way we would design it, but okay, we'll bend a little bit. We'll do it this way because that helps the between-home relationship and it makes it easier on the kids. I'm with you. I think step-parents can play a dynamic role in a positive way, just as long as you're seeking what's positive for the kids and not trying to be possessive of time or energy, because then you're an antagonist to that cooperation.
Correct. So one thing I would say to people who are engaged or thinking of getting married or dating someone, I would say that it's really important that you make it very clear to your fiancé, hey, co-parenting is important to me. It's important to me that I get along with my ex. I want you to know that they will be in our life. And I want you to know that I am choosing you, but they will be in our life. And I would like you to encourage that co-parenting relationship. And I found that with clients who have done that, it has really helped starting off right.
That's good. That's good. Okay, so let's talk about some key principles that are going to be applicable to everybody listening. I'm going to put a couple of them together and let you comment on them. So your children need you both. You're both very important to your child's life, and it's your job to provide some emotional safety for your children. Comment a little bit on those principles.
Okay, so obviously children are born with a mom and a dad. They need both parents, especially if they've grown up with both parents. Providing safety is your job from infancy to the time they go off to college, and even then you're worried about them. And what does safety mean? That's the real question. Safety does not just mean a roof over your head and 3 meals a day and clothes. Safety also means emotional safety, and I think often parents don't think about that. So what can I as a parent do to help my child feel more emotionally safe after divorce? Well, one thing is never say anything mean or nasty or anything negative about your ex in front of them.
Yeah.
Be mindful that this child loves both parents and that sun rises and sets on them. I always tell my clients, I said, you're on a pedestal until they're about 14, and then they knock you off themselves.
Right.
But you have to recognize the child's right to keep the other person on a pedestal and make them feel that that's okay.
By the way, I do think eventually they put you back up on the pedestal, especially when they have their own children. All of a sudden they're a little more grateful for what you did bring to them in life. Okay, so this feeds into one of the other principles, and that's respect each other as parents, that's absolutely essential, that you respect the other household, that they have rights and privileges, and that they are important to the life of the kid. Sometimes that's difficult for people. Like, no, you don't understand. My former spouse was a horrible person to me. Therefore, it's hard for me to give them any credibility as a parent to the kids. Again, that just is one of those marriage things that gets in the way of the parenting process. Respect, why is that so important?
Well, I think that it's important because the children need to respect you and your ex, and that's the atmosphere you want in parenting. I think it's very difficult for parents to say, well, why am I supposed to respect him? He had an affair. Why am I supposed to respect him? He hurt me. I think we have to give each other permission to redefine ourselves after divorce. And that redefinition comes into parenting as well. I always think of the example of a father who has a daughter and he never did their hair. And of course, all of a sudden he's got the kid for a week and he's learning how to braid and he's learning how to pick out cute little outfits that he never did before. And instead of kind of calling that into question, it would be important for that father's ex to say, good job, thank you. And to recognize that just because they didn't do it when they were a parent with you, they have the right and privilege and the opportunity now to redefine themselves. And so I think we have to give each other grace to become a different person after divorce. I mean, women sometimes have to get a job.
To kind of figure some things out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. You say be aware of your emotional bucket. Explain that.
Well, I think that often co-parents can be very negative toward one another. And I think each of us has only a certain amount of emotion to go around. We're not limitless, right? And so the question is, where am I going to put my emotion? Now, if I am putting a lot of negative emotion out toward my ex-husband or ex-wife, I'm depleting my emotional energy. Why would I do that if I want to invest in those people who are life-giving and who I enjoy, especially my children? So I think we have to be mindful of the fact that when we give emotion, it's something kind of precious. And do we want to continue to do that with our ex? Or do we want to kind of step back and become a little bit more businesslike, a little bit more neutral to them emotionally? And that neutrality is what's going to feed that civility, I think.
You know, that's really good. I don't think I've ever had that thought presented in the way you just shared it, that if you're dishing out emotional energy towards the other home, that's expending a lot of who you are, and you don't have the positive reserves necessarily for the people you do want to invest in. So not only is it tainting that co-parenting relationship, but it's sort of expending what you have available and channeling it into something negative. That's really important. And then one of the last principles you have about good co-parenting is that divorce is shocking and painful for your child, and it's your responsibility to help your child process the changes that they are facing in life. Let me ask you a quick question. The idea that divorce is shocking and painful for children, at the risk of being a little insensitive to whoever's listening right now, why is that not so obvious sometimes to parents?
Several reasons, but one would be that parents are often so involved in their own pain that they're not watching the children very carefully, emotionally.
Yeah.
And I think also kids seem very resilient. Kids are amazing creatures, and they are able to kind of just take it sometimes without showing. Obviously, like I have a person I've been seeing recently who just told their children about 2 weeks ago they were getting divorced, and she said it was amazing. The kids were looking forward to it. And I thought, yeah, they're resilient. They're doing well. But watch, it may come out in school.
Yes.
It may come out in relationships. They may be depressed. You might not know it. And I'm not trying to say that all kids are going to have a terrible time, but I think it's our responsibility as parents to watch and make sure that we're not just being so positive that We forget that there might be a problem. I think also sometimes in divorce, kids are pleasers. And so they will be amazingly well behaved. And it's
Yeah.
like, what's wrong with them? They should be a little angry here, but they're not.
Yeah, to me, that goes back to creating safety for themselves. They're wanting to maintain this relationship with mom, so I'm going to be pleasing to mom. And when I'm at dad's, I'm going to be pleasing to dads. And I'm not going to show my angst because I see how much you guys are hurting already. And so I'm taking care of you by just kind of keeping that off your radar. And, my initial reaction to the kids are looking forward to it is, of course, there's a piece of them that's looking forward to it. There's going to be less yelling, less conflict, less something. But there are other pieces of them that are not looking forward to it, that are disappointed, that are hurt, that are sad, deeply sad about all that's happening. And so, yeah, don't take any one reaction as if that's every piece of them. There's a lot of little slivers made up of a child's heart. And so take it for what it is, but then recognize they still need somebody to come alongside them over time. And as they age and as they grow, those other little slivers of them tend to come to the surface at different points in time. And so when you see that thing, well, then reach out and minister to that, hug that, try to be attentive to whatever that new piece is, even if it's something that's a little hard to face.
Right. I think children are naturally status quo keepers. They're safety seekers, they're security seekers. And so I think as co-parents, we have to be really sensitive to where our children are feeling the need to keep the status quo. And we have to maintain to them that it's my responsibility. It's okay. Mommy and daddy are going to make sure everything's okay. So that they don't feel like they have to keep the status quo. And this happens a lot, I think, when there are several children. The older children will actually all of a sudden become parents when mom or dad are emotionally unavailable, and that's not real good for them.
Okay, one of the things you talk about, Mary, is the games that co-parents play with one another, and we're just going to hit 2 or 3 of them here. But these are fairly common, and it sounds like you believe these are pretty insidious for the kids, so that's why we're talking about them. Tell me about pain games. What is that, and what does it look like in real life, and what's the impact on a child?
So what I call pain games is when one or the other spouse, ex-spouse, tries to really punish the other person, either through constant litigation or through DHS reports. I've had couples, they dually DHS reported each other on a regular basis, or more commonly, changing schedules. Constantly, I'm late, I'm early, I'm not going to see him this Friday, I'm going to change to next Friday. Now, you would say, well, what does that have to do with the kids? Well, first of all, kids are sensitive to litigation. They know when you're under stress. When you make a report to DHS, obviously the children are brought in to talk to some stranger. They're taken out of class if they're in school, so it really affects them. It's scary. And then changing schedules is like a broken promise to the children. I mean, they have a particular visitation schedule, and when we don't meet it, we're breaking our promise to them. And so all of those things kind of have a negative effect on kids. When I say I'm going to be there at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, I need to be there at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, not at 2 o'clock Saturday afternoon. Then how is the child supposed to trust me?
So for some people, it's a sort of a passive-aggressive, oh, I'm sorry, I'm late, and that's creating pain in your life. Maybe it's a payback. Maybe it's just hurt and anger spilling over. But I create pain in your life, and that makes me somehow feel better. But at the end of the day, the kid is the one who's suffering the most.
Exactly. I have a young couple I see now, and he's constantly late. He doesn't call. And it's not because he's nasty. It's because he doesn't want her to tell him what to do.
Wow. Yeah. See, this is a good example of let the marriage die. Yes. So that's still a husband who resents his wife telling him what to do. So I'm now, even though we're not married anymore, I'm still not letting you tell me what to do. And that spills over into the other co-parent's attitude. But you're always late. So am I going to do you any favors? No. I continue to be more embittered toward you because, again, you've proven you're unreliable and not dependable and untrustworthy. So I'll probably pay you back somehow. And boy.
In the meantime, you've got a child who's crying or upset. And guess who has to deal with the upset child? The one who's waiting, whose life has been disrupted.
Okay, so just cut to the chase, Mary. If somebody's listening right now and they're going, oh, geez, that's me. I do that pain game stuff. What should they do?
Stop. I mean, I would say it's like the Bob Newhart video about therapy.
Yes, stop it. Just stop. Show up on time. Try to be reliable. Keep your promise.
And don't look at the custody agreement as something that was put upon you by your ex. A custody agreement is something that the court sanctions. And there may have been a battle to get there, but in the end, the court has sanctioned it. So don't blame each other for those things in the custody agreement that maybe you don't like. If you need to, go to your lawyers, go back to court and switch things around, or better still, meet together and together decide how you want to tweak things. But don't blame the other person. Because in the end, if you've had a battle in court, the judge is the one who has made that decision.
Let me turn that upside down. If I'm blaming you for my unhappiness, I have just given you a whole lot of power over my life. I think we're back to, do I want to be free? And do I want to be able to live life and make decisions and do the right thing? Or do I want to constantly tie my happiness to who you are in the other home? Somebody who doesn't want to be married to me, I don't want to be married to you, whatever the backstory is. That just seems really unhealthy to tie your own happiness to somebody who's not invested in you. And yet that's exactly what you're doing when you are constantly blaming them for what you feel like is an injustice for you. Wow.
I think that's true. And I also think that tying your children's success or lack thereof to what happens in the other house is not healthy as well. Because
say more about that.
Well, if a child is brought up in two homes, they're going to be different, right? There are differences in the two houses. Hopefully there'll be some general things that are consistent. But to blame the other parent when a child gets D's or when a child is having a fight on the playground, not helpful. The helpful thing is to look and say, okay, what is my child trying to say? Because he's saying it to both of us. What is he saying? What is the child communicating? And how can we respond to that rather than turning it into a fight between the parents? And I think that happens often.
What is my child's need and how do I respond? Just stay away from the whole blame game of the other household.
Exactly.
Okay, let's do another game, and it's called I Spy. What is I Spy?
That's when parents use the child as a messenger, as a detective. Sometimes co-parents will have their relationship through their child. I'm working with a couple now who never speak, but the child is the one who mitigates everything. I met with the child and she said, I don't want to do that anymore.
Wow.
Because when she's put in that position, she can't have a relationship with mom and a free relationship with dad. There's always something she's got to balance. There's always a piece of information or something. So I Spy is when you use your child as a messenger, even if it's about changes of plans, or when you're asking your child things like, oh, is mommy dating? Or is daddy dating? Or did daddy go to work? Did daddy get a new car? I mean, those things in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with them. But when you ask a child, they feel a sense of betrayal. So you're asking the child to
Yeah.
be put in a position that they don't need to be in.
Wow, definitely avoid that one. Okay, let's do one more game. You call it setup. Tell us about that.
Okay, so I say that setup is common, and it's when you set one of the co-parents up as the bad guy. And often there is a bad guy. Sometimes there's somebody with a drug problem or a drinking problem, or they had an affair, or they have a bad temper. But the child does not need to be privy. The child doesn't need to be privy to that. What that does is that it puts the child in a position where they feel like there's something wrong with the other parent. And then if there's something wrong with the other parent, then there must be something wrong with them, because for their whole life they've been told that they're like that other parent, or this is like their other parent.
Yeah,
Or
right.
they don't feel like they should have a free relationship with that other parent. And if that plays out farther down the line, you could be developing an alienating situation from a parent. And parental alienation is a bad thing, because what it does is produces a sense of abandonment in your child by one or the other parent. And abandonment's really destructive to children. So I think it's natural at the beginning to kind of say mean things or react, but it's really important, if you see that you've done it, apologize to your children and go forward with a positive attitude.
And certainly stop setting up the other parent as being the bad guy. You know, again, as you were talking, I had a thought. What's implicit in negative comments about the other home that set them up is a request. It's almost as if you're saying, okay, because your father or mother, whatever the case is an alcoholic, you should be more loyal to me. You should want to spend more time here. You should listen to us. Our values should trump their values. It's an implicit request for loyalty to a child. And whether you mean it that way or not, that's something they hear and internalize. And then, I love the way you said it, they're not free at that point to love the parent. And what a bind, because they do love their parent. They do want to be close. They do want to maintain that relationship.
Yeah. And some parents would say, but my values are better. Here we go to church and we do this and we do that. In that house, they don't go to church and they drink in the evening and da-da-da-da. If you've got a problem with that, sit down and talk with the other parent. Don't use your child to express that issue. And don't assume that just because you have Christian values does not mean the other family is destructive, because often in divorce, there's a difference in value systems.
And there certainly is some nitty-gritty. I talk about this quite a bit in a few of my books, especially the Smart Step Family. I do think there's a time and a place to explain to your children what your values are about. Yes, they're different than the other home, and to lay those out. But it's how you do it. If the tone is speaking truth in love, then you're gracious about the other home. You're kind and respectful in your tone about the people in the other home. And you can have a difference of values, and you can explain that. Mm-hmm. It's very different when you say, well, our values are better because we love Jesus, because of this, because of that, and therefore you should reject them. That's the nature of what you're saying. Well, that's very destructive, and ironically enough, just shows that you don't live your own values. I think that's a message that a lot of Christian people really need to take to heart. Just because you espouse those Christian values does not give you the right to be malicious in how you deliver or speak about those values with the other home. I got to ask you about a couple of hot topics, Mary. Why is it important to have a parenting plan for co-parents? I mean, I think sometimes people really struggle with, man, I know the court's going to make us do that. At least most states require that in the divorce certificate. But there's always an evolution to how parenting takes place over time that the original parenting plan doesn't necessarily cover. And so it's just a headache to be trying to, again, revisit how we're going to parent. Well, why is it important to do that and get it right?
I have like an illustration in my book where mom and dad are on the tightrope, and there's a net underneath. And when we make a
Hmm.
mistake, which inevitably we will, we both fall into the net. And that net is made of our love for each other, our forgiveness, our relationship, right? So when you make a parenting blooper, which I'm assuming you have, and I've made many,
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes.
we fall into the net. And the net is we love each other and we'll repair. Well, when you divorce, there is no net.
Hmm.
And inevitably, you will make parenting mistakes because you're parents. That's the nature of the beast. So, what are you going to do? What's going to hold you? And I believe that that co parenting plan is kind of like that net. These are the
Hmm.
decisions we've made. These are the values we've chosen for our children, and that's going to hold us when we make a mistake, or that's the thing that we trust. We don't necessarily trust each other because that's a lifelong healing process. But if we trust
Hmm.
that we both decided on this plan and this is how we're going to do things, then there's some kind of safety in the way that we're doing things, and trust
Hmm.
that when I send my kid to my ex-husband's house, they're not going to eat Fruit Loops for dinner, or he's not going to hang them by their earlobes, or this is
Hmm.
how we're going to discipline. We are going to spank. We aren't going to spank. We're going to use timeout. We aren't going to use timeout. I know and I can trust that my ex is going to do what we decided we would do in order to parent the kids.
What if somebody wants to make a minor change to the visitation schedule or to that parenting plan? Do you have any good general counsel about how to go about that, or whether they should even bother making the minor change and how they should go about it?
Well, when I work with a couple and we make a co-parenting plan, I always tell them you can come back anytime you want. We'll tweak it if you need to. I would
Hmm.
suggest that if you both want to make a minor change, make it together. I mean, a co-parenting plan is kind of like a living document. I mean, I had these parents come to me. Their kid was 2, and they were breaking up. Their co-parenting plan was 13 pages long. I mean, they hit every topic, including their last will and testament in that co-parenting
Wow.
plan. But not everybody does that. And so sometimes, you're going to make a co-parenting plan for a 5-year-old. You don't know what kind of curfew you want them to have when they're 16. You don't even know if you want them to date, you know. So I think you can maybe put in the plan to revisit it.
Yeah. And that happens in intact homes. I mean, parents are making it up as they go, right? And so
Yeah.
you're going to have to do the same. So build in some expectation of revisiting that with one another. What's your general counsel, Mary, about phone calls? When my kids are in the other home, should I call? How much? Text? How much contact should I make? Do you have a principle there that's helpful?
Well, I think it's very individualized, depends on the people, depends on
Hmm.
the parents, it depends on the children. I think in general, the principle is when the children are at one home, they need to know that the other parent has a presence there. In other words, if mom calls, she's welcome to call, and I'm at dad's house, and I don't have to feel bad about her having a presence there. Okay.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
there also has to be a real respect of the other parent's time. I'll give you an example. I had a couple, and they had like 3 or 4 little kids, and I suggested that they have a nightly call just to say goodnight, 2 minutes or
Hmm.
less. Say goodnight to the kids because they were concerned that the kids would miss the other parent. But it didn't work out. It would upset the children. So they didn't have the nightly call, and it worked out fine. So I think you have to see what your kids' needs are, and also, but don't do it for yourself. You do it for the child. I think there should be some connection when the child is at the other house, whether that's nightly or once a week, or just if the child is older. Sometimes parents will just say the child can call whenever they feel like it.
Hmm. Right.
I mean,
Right.
because a lot of kids don't like to talk on the phone, and sometimes they want to tell their other parent what happened at school or something.
Hmm.
So I think it's very individualized, but I think the key principle is make sure that at each home, the child knows that your presence, like on phone or on FaceTime, is welcomed and not
Hmm.
discouraged.
Let's do one more hot topic, and that has to do with if you're concerned about some of the behavioral standards that are taking place in the other home. TV shows or movies kids are getting to watch that you would prefer that they not get to watch, or language or behavior, or just something there. What's the appropriate way to handle that as a co-parent?
Well, first of all, it's not appropriate to talk to the child about the difference in the two homes. Well, daddy
Okay.
lets you swear, but I don't let you swear. That's not helpful. I think you need to go straight to the source, and the two co-parents need to sit and talk. Hopefully that will have been addressed in the co-parenting plan. Like one of the big things we talk about is electronics and standards for electronics and movies and TV. That's a big deal. I mean, children, they've got an iPad in their hand all the time now. And so it's really important that parents are of one mind. How much iPad time do you have? And what are you allowed to do? What kind of games do you play on your PlayStation or whatever it is? So it would be important that parents are of one mind with things like that. If there's a deep concern, like allowing a child to drink at your house when they're 16 and we don't allow drinking at my house, that kind of thing, I think parents need to talk to each other. I think your first reaction is to take them to court for custody. I mean, that's the first reaction often, but the first reaction really needs to be, okay, we need to talk about this.
Okay, so let me play that out. On the low end, I can hear somebody listening right now going, oh, wow, we don't have that in our parenting plan, and I'm just now realizing we need to go back and revisit this and have a conversation and maybe update our parenting plan. And they're thinking, yeah, we could do that. On the other end of that continuum is somebody listening right now going, okay, we've had that conversation many times. I've tried in all grace and mercy to approach the parent in the other home, and they basically just say, well, forget you, I'm going to do what I want to do, and we're going to keep cussing in this household whether you like it or not. Then what does somebody do?
That's a tough one. That's a really hard question there, Ron.
And I know I'm pegging you on this because, and it's all contextual. So I do understand that there's a history and a story, and ideally you're sitting down with somebody who can help you navigate this space and figure out what your next move is, because if there was an easy move, we'd all know what it is. And so I know it's hard. Sometimes it feels like, well, going the extra mile means I try one more time to have a conversation, or I try in a different way. Sometimes that's a part of the equation. But you sort of know at the end of the day, they don't care. They're not interested in moving towards cooperation. When I get to that place, is it then okay for me to talk to my child, again, with a spirit of grace about the whole thing and not putting down the people in the other home, but being more clear about what our values are and why?
Okay, so that, yes, is complicated, particularly if it's a teenager who's being pulled between two homes.
Yes, right.
So I think, number one, we have to think as co-parents, how can I provide my child with an atmosphere of safety and security? Whatever I say and do is going to affect their safety and security. And also, how can I help my child know that I want them to have a deeper relationship with their other parent, and I'm not trying to pull them away? So those are kind of like, that's the sieve you use before you let anything out of your mouth. I think depending on the child and your attitude, I think you could sit down with a child and basically say, things are a little different here than they are there. Not making a value judgment, but at this house, this is what we're going to do. I don't think we should ever make the other parent out to be somebody who's bad or who doesn't care about the child. I think for all parents, we have to be committed to having the child have a deep and abiding relationship with their other parent. I think that's really, really important. Say a kid is 16 and he comes home and he says, I'm really concerned. Daddy's drinking every night and blah, 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 blah. So that's a hard one, right? You're supposed to say,
right.
well, so you might encourage them to talk to their dad. Maybe you should talk to dad, tell him how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying his best. Maybe you should have a talk with him.
Mm-hmm. And a 16-year-old, that's an appropriate thing for a
Yeah, I think that would
teenager
be
to
appropriate
do.
for a 16-year-old, yeah. Or you might say, if you know that maybe your ex is prone to being angry, you might say, I'll talk to him. And so then you go to the parent and you say, hey, this is really upsetting. But all of it is, I mean, it's vulnerable to have to do that because you don't know how the other person's going to react.
I'll give Dr. Patricia Papernow some credit for what I'm about to share. She taught me this years and years ago, and it's always stuck with me. In moments like that, sometimes what you can say to the other parent is, it's the give them the benefit of the doubt thing. Hey, I know you would never mean to put our son, or 16-year-old, in a tough spot or in a difficult situation. But you need to know that your drinking every night is scaring him. Not that you're trying to do that. I don't know everything that's going on for you. I'm just communicating what's happening so that you can begin to try to make some changes. Is there anything I can do to help with that? It's an awkward conversation no matter how you cut it. If you make it about you and the other spouse, the ex-spouse, it probably leads to more hurt and pain and bitterness between the two of you. If you make it about our child, it might soften their heart just a little bit, enough to hear what it is you're trying to say to them. Look, you need to get this drinking in check. You need to deal with this on behalf of our child, because that's where their motivation lies. And if you can appeal to that, it's something you can try long before trying to go to court or ask some third-party authority to start making changes for the parent. You really want it to come from within them, if at all possible.
Correct. That's very much like I use a Brene Brown principle sometimes with my co-parents. It's called living big. And big is boundaries, integrity, and generosity. And I ask them, if you believe that the other parent was doing the very best they can, how would that change your attitude toward one another? And I encourage them to do that. But then they say, well, why should I believe they're doing the very best they can? They're not doing the very best they can. I say that's where boundaries and integrity come in. If the other parent is doing something to compromise their integrity, my child's integrity, or our integrity as parents, then you go to them and you set a boundary. But if it's just an irritation, you believe they're doing the very best they can. And it'll revolutionize the relationship because you're distinguishing between the things that just kind of irritate me and the things that are worth addressing.
Okay, Mary, I got one final question for you. In your vast experience working with difficult co-parent situations, what's the one thing parents must do to at least begin moving the co-parent relationship in the right direction? What's the heart attitude, or what's the adjustment in behavior? What's something you got to do to at least move it and nudge it in the right direction? You've been listening to my conversation with Dr. Mary Jeppsen. I'm Ron Deal, and this is Family Life Blended. I know you, like me, are very interested in how she answers that question. We'll get back to that in just a minute. But first, I just want to remind you that if you have a topic or a question you'd like for us to address on a future podcast, you can submit it. Email it to us. blendedquestions@familylife.com is the address. blendedquestions@familylife.com. If you lose that, you can look it up in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. Now, if you're currently in one of those really messy co-parent situations, I can imagine that listening to Mary has felt like drinking from a fire hose. You realize there's so much you need to change, and you seem to be the only motivated one to do it. Okay, well, let me just remind you that in God's economy, loving your neighbor is always a good start. And honestly, since you're the motivated one, it has the best chance of making things better. surprising the other household by not being angry in return for something that they toss at you, finding ways to respect their time or their relationship with the children, or putting on self-control and remaining calm when you're interacting with all of them. All of that makes a difference. And by the way, it all spells love. And love changes the world, mostly because it first changes you. If you'd like more information about my guest, you'll find it in our show notes, or you can just check it out on the Family Life Blended podcast page. That's at familylife.com/blended podcast. And if you haven't subscribed, please do that. And you can do that on the Family Life app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just search Family Life Blended. We'd love to have you join us. And speaking of this podcast, we have many other episodes that deal with co-parenting and helping kids at the holidays. One of our most popular episodes, number 37, is about working with your child's teacher and school so co-parenting serves your child's education. Take a few minutes, take a look at that episode and maybe some of the others. Just scroll through our previous episodes. I think you'll probably find something that's helpful for you. And be sure to check out everything that Family Life Blended has for your family. Visit us at familylife.com/blended. Okay, before we're done, let's get back to those thoughts from Dr. Mary Jeppsen.
I would say develop empathy for your child, for your spouse, ex-spouse, and for yourself. So approach the whole co-parenting thing with an attitude of empathy. Empathy for what the children are going through, empathy for what I'm going through, empathy for what you're going through. And then the second thing I would say, learn to let go. Just let go. Let go of that former relationship. Let go of the pain. Let go of the hurt. Let go of the resentment.
Let go of trying to control your former spouse and blame them for everything that's going on.
And, I have to give spouses some credit because I think the control really is anxiety and it's worry. It's not people just being nasty. I think often it's scary. It's frightening to send your child to a house that you had nothing to do with. That's scary and it's anxiety provoking. So often the control we feel is just anxiety.
Yeah, and there's bound to be other better ways of managing that anxiety, that fear, than trying to control people outside of you who don't want to be controlled.
Correct.
I mean, so many times, again, back to acting divorced, so you had anxiety in the marriage when things weren't going well, and so you were controlling then, and it didn't work then, and you're thinking it's still going to work now. It's really not going to work now because you don't have a net under you, like you said. There's no motivation in the relationship to listen to one another and to heed one another, and so the other person is definitely not going to be controlled by you now. And so your strategy is sabotaging at that point your own anxiety. You're making it worse for you and most likely for your kids.
What I tell parents, and I think this is probably the best thing, is that make your house a safe house for those kids. Don't put undue burden on them. Be safe. Be a safe place for your children. And if both co-parents are committed to being a safe place for their kids, then the kids will have a sense of safety and they'll have a sense of security and they'll be okay.
Next time, we're going to hear from Heidi Farrell about adding an ours baby to your family. As in yours, mine, and ours.
That first year when we found out that we were expecting our first baby, it was exciting for us, but we were also nervous as to how the response would be from my stepkids.
That's author Heidi Farrell, next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening. And thanks to our monthly donors who make this podcast possible. If you'd like to help or just say thank you, for how the podcast has helped you, just look in the show notes for a link. Believe me, every dollar helps. Our producer is Marcus Holt, our mastering engineer, Dennis Leak, project coordinator, Ann Ancaro, and theme music composed and performed by Braden Deal. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network, helping you pursue the relationships that matter most.